Yeah, science.
This is the worst.
Welcome into the worst fantasy show. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay. Today on the show, we are talking about this crazy conspiracy theory that I've come up with after snorting some Cheetos.
I said, "Hot damn!"
And that's called Disparity Theory. So at the same time, we're going to be doing a fun little best ball draft over on Drafters. I am queued up. There's actually only one team left, and then we'll be ready to draft, and I'll pull that up. But before we get into that, I just wanted to kind of show my work a little bit about Disparity Theory, which is, if you guys haven't seen it, it's an article that I released. Shout out to, it's now Fantasy Sports Network. Oh my God, no, it's fantasysportsadvice.network is the new site for Tyler Bradley and the boys, formerly of Fantasy Football Advice Network. But I dropped an article over there. All my articles always drop exclusively on his website. Let's make this a little bit bigger, shall we? I wrote an article called Disparity Theory, and I just wanted to show a little bit about where I was coming from with the article. So the premise, basically, and I broke it down here. You can see the elite tier is in blue. The kind of regular good tier is in green. Your kind of meh guys are here in like a golden brown. And then down here in your orange is starting to get ugly. And in your red is your real ugly guys. And there's a real difference in mean to max and then mean to, end to mean. So what that means is the average performing running back and the average performing wide receiver, how far away are they from the peak and how far away are they from the floor? So with running backs, not only are they further from the floor, they're further from the peak. So with running backs, there is really high variability. And yes, you can find value in later rounds, but the only way you're getting up really into this bluish territory, if you look out of these players, only Kyren Williams and Raheem Mostert were like super late draft picks. And that's why it feels like an absolute home run when you get guys like that. But the rest of these guys, CMC, Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, those were all relatively high picks. Derrick Henry also, and Joe Mixon. Even though he was a value, he was still going in like the sixth round-ish. And then you had like Rachaad White, Bijan Robinson, James Cook. Those are all like highly drafted guys. So I think it's underrated that barring injury, even when it feels like your running back maybe isn't having the absolute greatest season, they're doing better than you actually think. So that's on the positive side. We got to get into this draft here. We are at, the 106. I love it. Love it. Love it. But yeah, getting back to this before we get into the draft. So really where this comes in, and we'll see it as I'm doing this best ball draft, is down here in this low tier of wide receivers. Now we're going to discount guys like obviously Drake London. That was based on injury and quarterback play. Deontay Johnson, kind of same thing based on the quarterback play. So those guys are obviously going to make a leap. But you look at a player like Jerry Jeudy, for example. You look at a player like even Darius Slayton, like Josh Downs. These are extremely late picks in best ball, and they're performing closer to the mean than your running backs in the same area, and they're also outscoring those running backs. Oh, we are having some technical issues because it's telling me I'm on deck, but it's not registering on my computer here. All right, let's see what's going on. Oh, yeah, it says we're on the clock even. Okay, well, I'm going to take Bijan Robinson. Let's refresh this then, see if that helps. Okay, it doesn't seem to like me bouncing around here. So let's just stay on the actual draft board for now. So we take Bijan Robinson with the first pick. I'm super comfortable with Bijan Robinson. If for some reason I get sniped on Bijan there, I would be just as comfortable with Breece Hall. I think Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall are basically the only two running backs I see, barring like an actual huge leap from Jahmyr Gibbs. They're the only two that have the potential to break fantasy football the way that CMC did. Now, the reason I wanted to do this draft specifically on drafters is because with the drafters scoring, it actually really heavily favors the PPR scoring. So while Christian McCaffrey broke fantasy even for underdog, it was an even greater disparity on drafters fantasy. He scored like, it's basically like in Scott Fish too. Scott Fish Bowl scoring. Christian McCaffrey had like 450 to 470 fantasy points, depending on those scorings. And Breece Hall at number 2 had like 350. So it was a huge gap. So you look at who could potentially be the players that make the leap into the elite Christian McCaffrey breaking fantasy tier. To me, it's Bijan Robinson and it's Breece Hall. And then when it comes back around, here is my thing. The difference between Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, and Brandon Ayuk potentially is really not that big compared to like the next tier down. So what I mean by that is if I don't draft one of these guys, and I'm not going to, I'm going to take Saquon. This is actually one of my favorite parts, is Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley right off the top. We get two what I perceive as bell cow running backs on excellent teams with good offensive lines. And Saquon, I think there's some questions because of the tush push. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, DeAndre Swift, had a really good season last year, and Saquon is significantly better than DeAndre Swift, in my opinion. And you can't tush push from 10 yards out, 8 yards out, 5 yards out. Those will go to Saquon Barkley a lot of times, either as rushing attempts or as receiving attempts. And whereas DeAndre Swift often was going down at the 1 yard line, Saquon Barkley is a much better tackle breaker than DeAndre Swift. So you give a guy like Saquon Barkley the lanes potentially and the room to operate that DeAndre Swift had, Saquon could have a monster season and be in that top tier of that blue section of our running backs. And again, the thing is like the blue section of the wide receivers. So, Brandon Ayuk, if Brandon Ayuk has an excellent season, like 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns would be a really solid season for Brandon Ayuk, assuming he stays with the San Francisco 49ers, because to a certain degree, oh man, are we going that high T that we're going 3 running backs? Yes, we are. We're going to take Kyren Williams here. We're going to see how this really works out. This is like the bane of the existence of best ball managers, I think, starting with 3 running backs. But our running back room is basically done now. And I have 3 guys that can really separate themselves, on a season-long basis, because this is a cumulative scoring tournament as well, which is important to note. But also on a week-to-week basis, 2 running backs and a flex potentially scoring in this format 20 points per game plus. Yeah, that could be huge for the meat of my team if I'm able to build around it correctly. And again, we'll see who comes back to us. But like what I was trying to say before I was on the board there, the difference between Brandon Ayuk and Amari Cooper in terms of fantasy points and their finish really isn't that big. It's a difference of like 20 to 50 fantasy points. Whereas like the difference between Kyren Williams and Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson and potentially, you know, the guys that I would be trying to hit on late, it's like it's very hard to find the Raheem Mostert. And this year it might actually just still be Raheem Mostert, hilariously enough. But it's really hard to find the guys that actually go from double-digit picks to they break into that elite blue tier of fantasy point production. You actually find it more often in the top end of the rounds. And again, we're back. Look at this. I've got George Pickens, I've got Amari Cooper. I'm very comfortable with both. I'm going to take Amari Cooper as my wide receiver one here. Amari Cooper, just year over year, is consistently putting up 200 plus fantasy points. He's going to have spike weeks, potentially has better quarterback play this year with a healthy Deshaun Watson, hopefully. And if not, it's going to be Jameis Winston hoping, chucking and praying. So to me, the situation gets even better for fantasy should, for some reason, Deshaun Watson get hurt this year. I will say the one disadvantage you could argue is that with the roster construct of drafters, it is 3 wide receiver. But like I mentioned before, it's also 2 running back and a flex. And the running backs, when you hit on those true running backs, they're more consistent week to week, generally speaking, especially in this kind of format that favors the PPR. So like the pass catching running backs, they have a more consistent floor, generally speaking, than wide receivers, because even the best wide receivers can just absolutely disappear on you with like a 3 for 40 week. So, and there's so much value this year at wide receiver that I feel comfortable waiting. Like, again, just looking at who's potentially coming back around to us, it's good. It's really hard for me to ignore James Cook there. But I'm looking at, you know, Calvin. Oh, Calvin just literally went off as I was speaking. Spoke too soon. Oh man, James Cook would actually be silly. Very silly. I really like Kyle Pitts, but you know what? We're done. We're just going to literally be done running back. I don't think there's anybody out here in 2024 starting best ball drafts with 4 running backs. But if 3 of these 4 running backs hit, and especially if it's all 4 of the running backs hit, considering that now I would potentially be covered for bye weeks, injuries, that kind of thing. And we'll see how the rest of this team turns out. I was really torn there, though. I was looking really hard at Kyle Pitts at that onesie position. But with all the rookie wide receivers incoming as well, it really pushes a lot of valuable wide receivers down the board. Like, y'all can hate on Adam Thielen all you want. Adam Thielen in his gross season with the Vikings before he left, when he was considered like washed, still put up I think it was 170 fantasy points in this format. And regardless of what they added in Carolina, he's still, I almost look at him like a tight end where he's like the first down and red zone guy. But this is a hilarious build. I will admit, I feel like I'm almost pressing my luck and doing this on purpose because of the stream of really grabbing 4 running backs with my first 5 picks. Normally I don't do that. Normally I would have taken Kyle Pitts or a wide receiver there. I also think this is normally a place where I would take a lot of chances on rookies. Like, I really love Lad McConkey, but I think he's going to be off my board in this very specific situation. Just because at this point, I'm going to be looking for the type of just solid wide receiver production instead of like trying to take the home runs on Lad McConkey and Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas, who I all love in this range. Which is why normally I feel like I'm willing to wait on wide receiver. Oh my God, Kyle Pitts made it all the way back. Yo, Kyle Pitts.
Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. Come on. Yes.
Hey, it worked.
All right. Easy money. Come on.
The fact that I was considering him at my last pick at that onesie position, the way that, if Kirk Cousins is healthy and Pitts can actually finally have a chance to like perform as the generational receiving tight end that he was drafted to be, that's a smash pick for me in the 6th round there. And it locks down a onesie position, and we can wait on quarterback. There's just tons of quarterbacks that are going to come back to us. There's so many quarterbacks that I'm fine taking late. I take a lot of Amari, generally speaking, in this range, but I'll just be waiting even longer, honestly, all the way down to like maybe Jaden Daniels with his rushing ability and potential to break fantasy. But I'm fine waiting all the way down to like Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert to that range of quarterbacks. I love this build right now. The fact that we took 4 running backs and still managed to get Amari Cooper and Kyle Pitts, that's really funny to me. Oh, look at this. Look at this. I kind of like JSN here. I don't buy him taking the step really as much as most people, but if he does, that's a tough one for me, though. I don't have a lot of Keon Coleman, to be honest. I know I said we were kind of fading rookies, but it's like someone's got to catch for Buffalo, but not, I'm going to take the JSN pick. Shout out to my guy Hoove. This is a pick for my guy Hoove. We didn't get Lad McConkey, who I am betting is going to have a better fantasy finish than JSN. But we'll take JSN as the consolation prize for our wide receiver 2. And we're going to start grabbing some of these wide receivers. And again, the difference between, it looks really gross, but the difference between Courtland Sutton and again, some of these like middling performing wide receivers like Courtland Sutton and T. Higgins in terms of fantasy finish, really not that different, to be honest. Especially, I feel like T. Higgins has to be like the most overrated fantasy asset, I feel like, and there's just no way I would be touching him in round 4, especially like Calvin Ridley's still on the board. I actually don't mind Hollywood there. Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson. Like, I like all of those guys more than T. Higgins, to be honest. It's just like, first of all, too, I feel like it's being severely underrated how potentially Joe Burrow's wrist injury could affect him, at least in terms of pain management and tolerance. But I don't know, if he misses games again, that team is not set up to survive long absences from Joe Burrow. However much you might believe in the kid there, Browning or whatever his face is. Now, if I can hear, let's make the argument against too. The reason people will say, wait on running back is because now range of the draft, there are a lot of these running backs. But I mean, again, at this point, I feel liberated from having to like parse amongst these gross looking running backs, and I'm going to take the potential on a Jaden Daniels, actually. Again, the way that Drafters is set up, it's pretty sure it's 4-point passing touchdown, meaning that the running quarterbacks have the potential to break this format of fantasy even more than in other formats. And because I know that I can pair him with a pretty safe passing quarterback a little bit later on, I'm going to take Jaden Daniels there. Hell, if Jordan Love makes it back to me here, I might even just take both my quarterbacks and just be done with quarterback, because I usually don't take more than 2, maximum 3. But this is the range of wide receiver that I actually really like. Now, obviously, Tyler Lockett, I know people are acting like JSN's just going to wipe him off the mat. I disagree with that. The only reason I'm not going to take Tyler Lockett there is because obviously I don't want JSN and Tyler Lockett. I also have to consider the fact that both of my wide receivers have the same bye week, which normally I wouldn't care about. But if I get Romeo Doubs here, now I have 3 of the wide receivers out on bye on the same week. I love Rashid Shaheed. If he falls to me here, that could be in consideration instead of taking my quarterback. Yeah, that's going to be the move. We're going to take Rashid Shaheed. He just signed a small extension with the Saints. They kind of, are. I feel like they're forced, in a sense, to operate in that way because of their salary cap constrictions. But I also know that they really like him. Derek Carr is willing to take shots down the field, and he had a different bye week. Though I will say it was also a week 12 bye week, which I'm starting to pile up a lot of those as well. I've got Bijan and James Cook and Kyle Pitts all on a week 12 bye. But again, the value at wide receiver here, like a lot of these guys are going to perform closer to the mean than the running backs. And that's, I can see where, like, I don't see upside for Brian Robinson, for example. Like Brian Robinson, the best possible season that I could see him having would essentially be a David Montgomery season. And that's fine, but like compared to, again, where I took my running backs and the way that they are able to potentially create a larger gap for me, whereas like the gap between the wide receivers won't be as big. That's where I'm going to make up the ground, essentially. We'll see if it works. Maybe it turns out that I'm just completely gobbledygook crazy. But I'm looking at guys like Brandon Cooks and Jacoby Myers with that week 10 bye. Man, that week 10 bye is going to be a killer. I don't think I feel like that's when people are going to be sleeping on a little bit, the week 10 bye. I really like Dontavian Wicks here too. He's a nice upside. Oh, Brandon Cooks. He's just going to keep doing things. And at this point, I just want to make sure I load up on some wide receivers that are going to actually produce. And again, my hope and my reasoning is that wide receivers potentially have an easier path to spike weeks if they aren't going to be consistent. So that's one. And two, it's that, like I said, at their worst performing, they perform closer to an average wide receiver, which means they also perform closer to the best wide receivers. So like the gap between having a terrible running back squad and having a terrible wide receiver squad compared to someone who has the reverse, that's really where I feel like you lose a lot of ground. Excuse me. And we have a full team at this point too. Like I pressed my luck with the James Cook pick, to be perfectly honest. And even though I probably would have ended up taking Kyle Pitts, there's just the fact of I should not have taken that extra running back. We also did get sniped on Blake Corum. I normally always take Blake Corum when I also am doing a Kyren Williams build. But in this very specific instance, obviously, with my 4 running backs, I'm done at that position for the rest of the draft. I'm not even going to look at running backs. This is just going to be all wide receivers and not maybe, but definitely a backup quarterback. Wow, Justin Herbert. The ADP on Justin Herbert is starting to rise. Keep an eye on that, because they just both went in front of Jared Goff. And in all the drafts that I was doing before, Jared Goff was definitely going ahead of Tua. We're not going to mess around. We're going to take Jared Goff here because we need that balance with Jaden Daniels. Yes, Jaden Daniels obviously has that potential to break fantasy with the rushing upside. Jared Goff, though, super underrated. And I was just listening to Fantasy Footballers before I jumped on here. So shout out to them because all their information fresh in my mind for this pick. But Jared Goff has like 13 dome games this year, and his first 4 weeks of the season set up to absolutely crush. So Jared Goff should be my main quarterback for the first quarter of the season, long enough for Jaden Daniels to have emerged as a fantasy option. And obviously, having different bye weeks and them being so far apart, Jared Goff being more of a reliable type of quarterback where I don't have to worry about injury factor as much. Again, they balance each other out extremely well. So I love that quarterback pairing. And for tight end, I'll just do, whatever. I'll take whoever's available that I like. But again, the Daniels Goff pairing I think is really nice, and I got them at value, which I love. And for having gone wild man and taken all 4 of my running backs in the first 5 picks, this team's not looking that bad. Maybe it's just me. I feel like it's not looking that bad. But hey, you know what? Let's take a 30-second dance party, and we will be right back.
30-second dance party.
This is how we party.
And we're back. And we're going to be on the board soon. And we are looking at wide receivers. And this is getting into the part of the draft where the running back starts to get a little queasy. If you're looking at guys who could potentially, have a breakout year in this range, I do like Zach Charbonnet and obviously Kamani Vidal, being that Chargers running back room I feel like is wide open. But score. We're going to take our second tight end and wrap up our tight end room pretty much here. And we're going to take good old Taysom Hill. Good old Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is the most hilarious pick because it should not work, but it just does every year. And also, I just want to preface that Juwan Johnson, I still see Juwan Johnson being drafted. He has an ankle injury. He's not going to be available for the first part of the season. Potentially might not even be available for the entire season. So I would be hesitant to draft Juwan Johnson, especially in this type of format. And, obviously if they lose a tight end, it just means that Taysom Hill is going to continue to be a necessary evil in this offense. Adam Thielen. I can't believe they drafted Adam Thielen. He usually always makes it back to us. That's okay. You know what? I said we were done tight end. We could consider Musgrave here. I don't mind that idea, but probably we'll go with Quentin Johnston. Usually, I will say in a draft where I don't end up getting Lad McConkey and Josh Palmer because he goes way too early in my opinion. But in the drafts where I don't take Lad McConkey, generally speaking, I will take the shot on the Quentin Johnston bounce back here just because he's being drafted so late. Like, again, we're in round 13. If Quentin Johnston can bounce back and put up 807, he'll outperform this ADP pretty substantially. And also, finally, gives us a little bit of breathing room in terms of the bye weeks. But at this point, we're like full up. Like, we've got our quarterbacks, we've got our tight ends, we've got, obviously, our running back room is very solid. And we'll just keep hammering wide receivers. In fact, I think we might take wide receivers for the entire rest of this draft. Maybe we'll take one more tight end, depending on who falls where. We could consider maybe one more running back, but we don't need it. It would be an absolute luxury. Let's just start putting in some wide receivers I like. So Michael Wilson, kind of being left for dead, but potentially if he kind of takes a step forward, you know, he could be the wide receiver too, behind Marvin Harrison Jr. It's kind of wide open there in Arizona in the wide receiver room behind the rookie sensation. If we wanted another quarterback with upside, Will Levis potentially, with all of those wide receivers kicking around. Love Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson might be my most drafted wide receiver. To me, there's just no way that he doesn't find a role on Pittsburgh and outproduce this ADP of, again, going in round 14, 15. I will say I love Tyrone Tracy, but again, we just don't really need a running back. I do love Bryce Young. I love Bryce Young to take a step forward this year too. He's a guy that I kind of have a lot of as my quarterback 3. I like Javon Baker, the Dortch. See, the Dortch, that's like the Dortch and Tyler Boyd are exactly the type of guys in this range where compared to Dameon Pierce probably will give you less than 100 fantasy points this season. Like, he probably does not have a role in this offense. We're going to load up on some rookies here. We took some older statesmen earlier to kind of balance out this wide receiver room. Took some guys that, in Brandon Cooks particularly, and Amari Cooper, that I feel like a little bit older and more consistent. Especially Brandon Cooks had a stretch kind of towards the end of the season that I feel like especially if they're passing more this year, Brandon Cooks being kind of underrated. But Roman Wilson, I can almost guarantee if he makes it to us, Roman Wilson is our next pick. And drafters, that sucks. Roman Wilson. No.
Go fuck yourself.
That sucked. No, I wish I would have taken Roman Wilson with my last pick. Fuck. Oh. Okay. Well, this just doesn't feel. You know what? Fuck it. Let's take McCaffrey. I actually don't have a lot of McCaffrey. The Luke McCaffrey. Weird little stack too with Jaden Daniels. Hey, who knows though? Maybe younger McCaffrey able to do some things in his rookie season. I think that might be the first time I've drafted him actually, but we've got 7 wide receivers though. So at this point, we're taking dart throws on all of these guys, like Bucky Irving, Antonio Gibson, Elijah Mitchell, like all of those guys maybe crack 100 fantasy points, where it's like, again, I don't think people realize the wide receivers really don't need much to be able to put up like 125 to 150 fantasy points. Like 507 gets you there. 505 even. Oh, if he makes it to us, I think we'll take Bryce Young as a quarterback 3, wrap up the quarterback room. I don't know if we even really need it though. Oh, well, he's not going to make it to us anyways. Wow. Shout out to Myers CD. Waited all the way to round 15 to take his quarterback, and he doubled up on Bryce Young and Daniel Jones. I don't entirely hate that. Definitely some value picks there. Ugh. And we're getting in the nitty gritty of this. This is, again, on Drafters. They have the extra couple of rounds, too, where they go all the way to round 20 for you best ball drafting addicts. Oh. But this is why I like taking the wide receivers in this range, because it's guaranteed points compared to, again, like you can take your shots on Will Shipley and Tank and the like. They're probably not going to do anything. Yeah, let's go ahead and take. I love Javon Baker. I feel like he kind of has gone up and down in terms of his draft value, but I think he's going to find a role on this team. I do think it will take longer for him to break out. So obviously, taking him very late in most drafts. Oh, wow. The last 3 wide receivers, again, that I drafted, all with week 14 buys. Oh, joy. I also just noticed Taysom Hill and Kyle Pitts have the same bye week. That's great. Okay, we're going to take another tight end. Ben Sinnott, interesting, with a week 14 bye. Colby Parkinson, one of my favorite sleepers. Maybe we'll take him next. Because he kind of keeps getting sniped on me when I try to wait for his actual ADP. So I think he might be our next pick, actually, for reals. And if we get sniped, I would take Jatavian Sanders. No. If I'm going to take a rookie, I'd probably take Ben Sinnott and hope he makes it to me. And if not, we're going to take Parkinson here. Well, we're definitely getting one of them because there's only one person in front of us. Let's see if they take Sinnott. We want Parkinson, to be clear. Okay, nice. We're taking Parkinson. That saves us from that dreaded week 12 bye. Okay. I think we're going to just go with the 2 quarterbacks. I don't really want to mess with any of the quarterbacks that are left on the board. There are times where I've waited and I've actually taken Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as like my second quarterback. So it's like I take 3 quarterbacks. I make sure my first one is someone I view as, even if I took them late, like it's usually like on a build where it's like I took Justin Herbert or I took Tua. And then for my second quarterback, I take Russell Wilson and Justin Fields at the same time. And actually, I'm drafting Warrior Bowl. I probably shouldn't say this out loud, especially on a live stream. But hey, we're going to risk it. No risk it, no biscuit, right? And Warrior Bowl, I punted quarterback. And it's a super flex league. And I was coming out of the 9th, and I'm at the 11th pick. So I'm at 9-2, I think is what it is. And I'm thinking to myself, Bryce Young should make it back to me. And that's where I'll take my first quarterback. That was a mistake. Bryce Young was drafted by the guy at the turn at 10-1. So I am now, and then also like Will Levis went off the board and like a couple other guys went off the board. So now I am nervously anticipating my pick. I'm hoping that Russell Wilson will make it back to me. And if I can land Russell Wilson as my quarterback 1, I will be fine with that. And then I'm assuming that as it goes around the turn, I don't think the guy that's at 12 will take Justin Fields. If he does, that'll be really fucked up. I'll be kind of pissed. But assuming that he doesn't, I'm going to double tap both Steelers quarterbacks, and that'll be my quarterback 1, because there's no scenario to me where it isn't one of those 2 players starting for the year. I really love Jalen Hyatt here, and I love his upside potentially coming into his second year as a burner, a guy that could have spike weeks. You're not going to want to play him in a redraft league, but I think in this format could provide some value. And I look at a guy like Malik Neighbors. I look at Neighbors as pulling coverage away and potentially opening up the field downfield for a guy like a Jalen Hyatt, where, you have to pay attention to Neighbors, and then maybe Hyatt's the one that breaks the coverage over the top. And, regardless of how you feel about Daniel Jones, and even if it ends up being Drew Lock, because I don't know if Daniel Jones is even going to be ready to start the season, I feel like Drew Lock, maybe not the most accurate guy in the world, maybe not the best quarterback, but he's got a pretty big arm. He can push it down the field. So this late in the draft, when we're looking at, again, just upside for our wide receivers. And again, I think the other advantage is the positional scarcity. And that's kind of where a lot of the disparity comes into play as well, where it's like at this point in the draft, like I said, Will Shipley, Tank Bigsby, like all of these running backs, like Shipley, Bigsby, Lob, almost none of these guys are going to actually have any value. Whereas like the wide receivers that you're drafting in this range could still very well have multiple weeks where they're helping you score in your fantasy lineup. I'm going to take Andre Yoshivas here. I think Jermaine Burton is the hotness, but people are overlooking Yoshivas, who could potentially actually be that wide receiver 3, and maybe Burton has to wait a year. And especially if there is a situation where either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins are forced to miss time again this season, then we could see Yoshivas and Burton maybe potentially step into a bigger role. That's the same reason we're going to put Bo Melton in the list. KJ Osborne is another one too, where it's like, he signs as a free agent, and he's going to have a role in the offense. I don't know if it's going to be a huge role. I'm not like super enamored, but I have taken some late shots on KJ Osborne as just being a guy that can do some things. Marquez Valdez-Scantling in Buffalo is actually hysterical. Some of these other guys that I like. Okay, let's go look at. We have 10 wide receivers in this build too, which I love. We are very. It's like as much as. This is the thing. As much as like we waited on wide receiver, we have such a range of outcome with the amount of wide receivers that we took for this build, because we only took 2 quarterback and 4 running back. We're loaded with. We're going to finish this build with 11 wide receivers ultimately. Elijah Moore is sneaky also. Had 125 fantasy points last season on his like terrible season. Calvin Austin, kind of interesting too, since I missed on Roman Wilson. I have not taken a lot of him. He is more of a gadget player. Brendan Rice. Brendan Rice, hilariously, I kind of staked my claim to him. I think it's just, I couldn't get past the fact that he's the son of Jerry Rice. I just was like, that's got to be worth something. You know what? I was just on shout out to Big Draft Energy, who usually is doing these drafts on fantasy, on Drafters Fantasy. We were he invited me into a room. It was being hosted by Hot Take Energy, who just added me on Twitter. So make sure you go follow both of them. It's Big Drafters HQ and Hot Take Energy. They were hosting a Twitter space, and one of the guys was very adamant that Jalen Brooks was a deep sleeper and should be drafted for fantasy. So because we had that last pick in the 20th round, hey, let's throw Jalen Brooks on the very end of this roster. And so again, just kind of looking at things. And to be very clear, where the disparity comes in is the ability to completely break fantasy like CMC only exists with a handful of running backs, and you have to draft those running backs early. There are no running backs going late that I see that can put up CMC numbers. At the rate that they go, you need to get one of the Bijans or it's either that or you have to really hit on all of your other picks. I think what I like about this is a little bit more forgiving of a build in a sense, because running back injuries are running back injuries. You could always have that potential, but again, Bijan and Saquon are so secure in their role that I really just need Kyren or James to kind of latch on and get into that upper echelon. And the difference between these running backs and the value running backs that other people are going to be taking is going to be a lot greater than the difference between their wide receiver room and mine. Because especially, again, I was able to get 11 different guys with different situations that can hit on a week-to-week basis. We mixed up the tight end room, which I like as well. We got a stud, and then we got some value in Taysom Hill and Colby Parkinson. Same thing with the quarterback. We got a potential can break fantasy with the running quarterback stuff in Jaden Daniels, and a solid passing quarterback in Jared Goff with an excellent schedule and a bunch of dome games. And so it pairs nicely with, I waited on wide receiver, but I took a lot of shots on guys, and I took my consistency kind of early with the Amari Cooper and Rashid Shaheed and Brandon Cooks picks, so that I could take some upside in JSN and maybe Quentin Johnson bouncing back and some of these rookies hitting. So this is how I've preferred to attack some of these best ball drafts. And looking at some of these other teams, I always like to look at the team of who would I be jealous of? Who's the team that I really like how their build worked out for them? And so initially I'm looking over here at the guy that was right in front of me, Syracuse 44577. Went with a 3692 build. I like that. Really stacked wide receivers early in Jefferson, Adams, Neighbors, Pickens. Got that premium tight end. I'm big on getting the premium onesie. Christian Watson, Brian Thomas, very good upside wide receiver picks there. This is why I understand why some people want to wait on running back, is when you look at David Montgomery and Tony Pollard and Javonte Williams, those to me represent absolute values, but they're also capped values. Those are not guys, there's no scenario or situation where David Montgomery turns into Breece Hall or Christian McCaffrey leading the league. There's no scenario where Tony Pollard is able to do that either, in my opinion. Same with Javonte Williams. There is no scenario that exists where Javonte Williams can put up numbers anywhere close to Christian McCaffrey. But there are very much situations where Wicks, Thomas, JSN, Sutton, Reed, Deontay Johnson, Watson, Hopkins, Ladd, Holly, Ridley, all of those guys, the range of outcome for wide receiver is like 50 points. And so let's just go back to it one more time, the chart. And this is really this meaty middle of green performing players is where you can really see the disparity of your highest performing running back compared to the lowest performing running back, and the highest performing receiver compared to the lowest performing receiver, especially in this section right here. So you look at Gus Edwards, right? And you look at Rachaad White. Let's just imagine, it doesn't even matter necessarily where you're drafting them. It's just the fact of, at the end of the season, Rachaad White had 62 fantasy points more than Gus Edwards. Conversely, Jaden Reed only had, 39 and 7, 46 fantasy points less than Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel finished as wide receiver 6. So you're telling me that the difference between the wide receiver 6 and the wide receiver 20 basically was like less than 50 fantasy points. Whereas the difference between Gus Edwards and Rachaad White, 62 fantasy points. And then as soon as you get into this upper echelon, this is where it really gets crazy. So with the wide receivers, again, your highest performing elite wide receivers are always going to be great for fantasy. Anytime you're over the 300-point threshold, that's amazing. CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill had like 1,800 receiving yards. That's why it felt like they broke fantasy. Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's because he's incredibly consistent on a week-to-week basis. You know, Puka Nacua had a tremendous rookie season. He was pretty much the only one drafted in like super late double-digit rounds. Mike Evans was also a late pick, but it was more like 8th round. And the rest of these guys were high-end picks. So I look at, again, the difference of, let's go with DJ Moore as a good line here. 250 DJ Moore. The difference between, again, DJ Moore and Jaden Reed, only 57 fantasy points. It's pretty small. 57 fantasy points. Conversely, again, Gus Edwards compared to Kyren Williams. Oh, wait, no. Derrick Henry in the same range. 72 fantasy points. Again, it's an average of almost 20 fantasy points extra for the running backs in terms of how far away they are from the mean. And then the drop off, that's where it can get really crazy too, because if they fall under 100 fantasy points, which they often do because of just a lack of opportunity and specifically a lack of receiving opportunities, they are further away from the mean than wide receivers having a bad season. So again, you look at like a Jerry Jeudy, you look at a Curtis Samuel, you look at Josh Downs, Darius Slayton. These guys are performing still within 75 points of the average of their position, whereas the running backs, again, it's almost 20 more points, or 20 less points, you should say, of how far away they are from the mean, which is the average for their position. So this is why I'm saying, and yeah, you can look at guys. The whole goal of fantasy is drafting appropriately at price. So it's being able to look at these charts and say, hey, who are the guys in blue that I think are going to fall into green? Who are the guys in green I think are going to go to blue? Who are the guys down here in the kind of golden brown area that could jump into green or even not all the way up to blue? And there might not be. That's the thing, right? So when I look at running in this range, the way that some of these wide receivers can bounce back to where it's like, and I look at Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, who are very popular late picks. Again, to me, if everything goes right for Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, maybe they can end up in this green section. And maybe they don't fall into all the way down here into this red section. And with the wide receiver, it's like, even if they do fall, they're still closer to the average than the running backs who fall off. So I think that's part of why it feels like the running backs carry more risk, because when they fall off harder than a wide receiver even does. So a lot of it comes down to just positional scarcity. Again, there's 2 to 3 wide receivers on the field at any given time. There's usually only 1 running back, maybe 2 in a system that are viable for fantasy football. And for the most part, like, there's only a handful of running backs that you could say, this guy has the potential to be a bell cow running back, getting all the touches in the passing game and in the running game. And traditionally, those guys go before the late rounds. And it's not just that, like I said, the running backs going in those late rounds, generally speaking, aren't going to produce for you. They're going to produce less than the wide receivers you could be drafting in the same range, and further away from the average for their own position. That is pretty much it for me. We are going to wrap this up right here. I will be back next week live with a really great episode. We are going to be dropping Uncle Dave Meltzer star ratings for Scott Fishbowl teams. So I may have been a touch early. I already posted, and I've already got an absolute influx of messages of people responding. So actually, first of all, thank you to everyone who is responding out there. Keep doing it. I will do 2 episodes if I have to. But basically, next week when I come back live, we will be reviewing Scott Fishbowl teams and giving them star ratings, just like good old Uncle Dave Meltzer. So that'll be on a 5-star system. I'm not gonna do his stupid AEW bullshit of 5.75. No, it's 5 stars is the max. All right, but 5-star system, 5-star ratings, handing out ratings for Scott Fishbowl teams. So we'll be doing that next week. So if you want your team to get reviewed, or if you guys have questions or ideas for the show, hit me up at Jack Lucenay on all my socials. You can always send questions to worstsportschannel@gmail.com. Please super kick that subscribe button. Help support the show. We are organic. We don't do any ads or any of that kind of stuff. So the only way we're ever going to grow is if you super fans out there help support by hitting that like button and doing all the stupid algorithm stuff. But hey, till the next time, I'll catch all of you guys on the flip side.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes